So, one of the questions that get asked of is, well, what do the tail rotor pedals do? These pedals that you've got down there, what do they do? I've explained the collective, which is almost like a handbrake, which I describe it to people understand. They can relate it to car driving. And then the cyclic is more like a joystick, which you play games with, or old games before the before the PlayStation controllers came out, of course. But what do the pedals do? And you think, the pedals, all they do is there's a rotor, a small rotor at the back, or on some helicopter designs, it's more like a jet of, I want to say, air that is being propelled back, and there's a nozzle jet that is rotated at the back. But all that does, whether the rotor or this, what they call the jet of air, this Notar system, all that does is that it enables the helicopter to not spin uncontrollably as you pick up into a hover flight or into low speed flight. Because what will happen is that the rotor is spinning. Depends on the main rotor. It spins either clockwise or counterclockwise, depends on the manufacturer who manufactured it, right? And then the fuselage will want to naturally spin in the opposite direction. Okay, so the rotor spins in one way, and then the fuselage will spin in the opposite direction. So what will happen is that you've got to have some way of counteracting that. You've got to have some way of counteracting that. So if the main rotor spins counterclockwise, so it spins counterclockwise like that in this case, right? And it spins counterclockwise, then the fuselage is going to want to go. So as you pull up power, you're increasing the lift on the main rotor. So the rotor wants to go counterclockwise. The fuselage wants to pick up and wants to turn right. So you're going to apply left pedal to increase the thrust on the tail to push the tail to the right. In other words, then you're bringing the nose of the helicopter to the left. That's the reason why you're counteracting what the main rotor and the fuselage, how they interact with each other. And that's it. It's an anti-torque. It's a torque effect, this anti-torque thing that the tail rotor does and or the Notar system does. It just pushes the tail of the helicopter left or right, side to side, at the control of the pedals, and effectively at the front of the helicopter. The nose of the helicopter will either swing left or right, depending on how you do that. And then when you're, let's say, in forward flight, then the effectiveness of that tail rotor becomes less and less and less, because there's a lot more airflow flowing over it. It still is a little bit effective, but not so much, because you'll have horizontal stabilizers, you'll have vertical fins on the tail of the helicopter that can keep that tail straight and overcome this tendency for the fuselage to want to spin left or right, counter the main rotor rotation as well. Also, you got a lot of airflow going over the fuselage, which is aerodynamically designed to keep it pointing forward in a more streamlined fashion. So the tail rotor in forward flight, the tail rotor pedals are what we call just keeping the helicopter in trim, in aerodynamic balance, just making sure that it's as streamlined as possible. So it is a little bit effective, but most of that control comes from the fuselage itself rather than the tail rotor. As soon as you start getting into slow speed flights, or certainly getting into hovering flights, then that's where all the tail rotor is most effective. So this is, I get lots of people asking me this, what do these tail rotor pedals do? What do they do? And essentially, it's stop the helicopter spinning out of control. That's it. That's the easiest way to say it. It's just stops the helicopter spinning out of control. When the helicopter fuselage wants to spin one way, the tail rotor is there to enable the pilot to stop that spin and spin it out of control. So this is when we have, let's say, tail rotor failures or tail rotor linkage failures, or there's a tail rotor thrust failure, or there's an aerodynamic issue on the tail rotor that makes it lose its thrust, lose its lift, then the helicopter, depends. If you've got a counterclockwise rotor, the helicopter fuselage will uncontrollably want to start spinning to the right. So you can apply full left pedal, but if nothing's working, then the only way to do that is to, if you're in a hover, is just to roll off the engine power immediately and let the helicopter settle down. If you're at any height, you can do a mixture of that and get some forward motion to let it try and skid on the ground. There's a good chance you might induce a rollover. If you're in forward flight and you have a sustained engine to power to the tail rotor, there's a disconnect, there's a break in the shaft or whatever, or there's a problem with the tail rotor gearbox or that kind of thing, or there's an aerodynamic issue, then you want to get speed, and then it's either a case of entering auto rotation to try and get the aircraft on the ground and get as much speed as you possibly can to maintain that forward flight, because you're reducing the effectiveness or the demand on the tail rotor anyway, you see. So there's lots of different ways in which you can tackle the usefulness of a tail rotor, and also when it's not being used, and also if it fails as well. But there are critical moments in helicopter flight where it's absolutely required. And if it suddenly fails in these critical moments, that's when there's the helicopter's at its greatest peril, and the pilots are really having to work hard. And sometimes, it hasn't been recoverable. They haven't been able to recover it, and a lot of times to do. But this is what pilots train for. They train for this all the time. And so, yeah, those are one of the questions that I get asked on a regular basis.